Fed has told you that quantitative easing isn't forever. All right, now you start wondering these days whether it is forever or whether we're going to get QE 3, 4, 5. They're going to start using Roman numerals, and, you know. But you wonder. But nonetheless, it's temporary. At some level, it's temporary. So are you going to lend the money out? What if the Fed comes back and wants it back? Oh, oops. That was my buddy I lent it out to. He just built a warehouse. Now I got to call a loan because the Fed's constricting the money supply? No. If I'm a bank, I take QE and I'm going. By the way, there's also Dodd-Frank and new capital rules, right? So if I start lending that money, I need even more capital. They're squeezing me on that side, so forget it. I'm not messing with any of that. I'm giving it right back to the Fed. And that's what they do. They take this quantitative easing and they create excess reserves at the Fed. They just give it right back to the Fed. They earn 25 bips on the money, and that's it. All right, they don't have to hold capital for it. They're making 25 bips, and it's all found money because the Fed's created it all. All right, so let me ask you this. If the Fed's printing money and pushing it into the system, how is that driving up stocks? All right, now, let's think through it. There's another way to talk about it. They just poof money. You all of a sudden, you find money in your account, you go buy stocks. Or let's talk about helicopters. Like, what if they fly a helicopter around and throw money out? Or will people gather it up and push the baskets, run into your office, and buy stock, right? That's what Bernanke says. They ask him, well, they don't even ask him. He says QE drove up stocks. He said this chart is right. That's absolutely right. When we did QE, stocks went up. The next question was, what about oil? Oh, no, I had nothing to do with that. I love that. Only things I wanted to go up went up. Not things I didn't want to go. It has nothing to do with me. All right? But anyway, nonetheless, so he's saying quantitative easing drove stocks up. Now, if that's the case, then stocks are up artificially, right? Only because of the Fed money supply. So what would happen to PE ratios? Price earnings ratios. They would go up, right? Because I'm driving prices up regardless, no matter what happens to earnings, no matter what happens to the economy. All that new money is driving stocks up. Well, if that's the case, then PE ratios should be higher. But they're not. Here's when QE started. Here's where PE ratios are today. Now, remember, all in here, this was just a wacky time. Markets going through, it was way, way, way too low. We changed mark-to-market accounting right there. I don't even think QE had anything to do with all this stuff. But the bottom line is that PE ratios are down since the Fed started quantitative easing. I don't believe 1 second that quantitative easing drove stock prices up. Not once. All right? What drove stock prices up was earnings. And by the way, everybody's talking about earnings today. Did you know 62% of companies so far have reported a beat estimate? You know, so they all week long they're earnings are going to be down 1%. When it's all said and done, they're going to be up 3 to 4. Ask Bob Carey about that. All right, every time they're 4 or 5% under where they really turn out to be. We're going to surprise again on the upside. All right, and what's happening is that happens all the time. And so this idea that, it's all just a zombie and it's being kept alive by mystical means of Fed quantitative easing, I don't buy it. All right? Now, I want to go back to this. What a mess. All right. There we go. Where do we go from here? Because if we go up, then you're going, I don't want to own stocks. Right? If we go down, if the pendulum is swung, then I want to own stocks because we're back in 1982, 83 again. All right? I personally believe, and now this is where the forecast comes in, and it has a lot to do with politics. And before I even say this, let me just make another quick point. This was a Democrat, then we had a Republican, a Democrat. This was a Republican, this was a Democrat. There was a Republican right in the middle who liked to spend. But this was a Republican, this was a Democrat. This is not about the parties. This is not, I am not saying Republicans good, Democrats bad. That's not, what I'm saying is policy's good or bad. When you raise the size of government, that's bad. When you cut the size of government, that's good. And I'm also, just so you know, not an anarchist. All right? Government does have a role. All right, it's way smaller of a role than it is than the government's taken and bitten off today. But it has a role, and I, you know, to build highways, to defend our nation, to run our court system, to police and fire. I mean, there's a lot of things that the government should do, a lot of things they shouldn't do. But I'm not an anarchist. Okay, so the question is, where do we go from here? Now we have what I believe to be one of the most important elections in our lifetime. Now, I'm 53 years old. I have heard, ever since I was 18, this is the most important election of our lifetime. Every year, every 4 years, or every 2 years, really. I've laughed all my life about this. I'm like, oh, come on. The Civil War, guys, you know, how about that? You know, World War II. I mean, let's go back in history a little bit, you know. This time, it may be true. You know, France, from 1975 to 2011, France has averaged 2% growth and an 8.1% unemployment. That's where we are today. And that's where we will be if the pendulum doesn't swing. PE ratios will remain really low. You know, in the 1970s, small caps and IBM was where you wanted to be. All right? And high dividend payers. All right? And that if we don't shrink the size of government, we're going to have to find what works like that. Whether it's utilities or closed-end funds that have a good, you know, we want cash flow. Because it's not going to be with growth. All right? But if the pendulum is swung, then I want to be long growth. You know, and especially U.S. growth. So I wish I could tell you today exactly where to go. I mean, because obviously nobody has a crystal ball, me included, all right? But I'll tell you what I think. I believe the pendulum has swung. I think Europe is the classic example, right? What is that? This is Paul Krugman's Alamo, all right? He's losing. Keynesians are losing. It doesn't work. You can't spend your way to prosperity. I personally believe that Romney will be the next president with all his flaws of the United States. All right? I think Barack Obama will turn out to be a one-term president just like Jimmy Carter. Now, I'm not saying that Romney is the next Ronald Reagan, all right? However, my view is that will continue this pendulum swing. You know, the pendulum swung here, it swung here, it swung here. This is what voters wanted. They wanted a bigger government, they wanted a smaller government. I believe voters now, and it started back in November 2010, want a smaller government. It continued with Scott Walker. We had a hiccup with the Supreme Court ruling, but that wasn't the voters. That was one guy, all right, who I disagree with, but respect. He's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. And he tossed it back into the voters' laps. And I believe that the voters will say, we don't want that. In essence, that's what, even though we don't necessarily like that guy more than ever before, we're going to put him in because he said he will unwind it, right? And so as a result, what I'm looking at here is that I think this is about to swing. I could be wrong, all right? You'll hear from Jim Bowen today. And, you know, he thinks I am wrong about that. He thinks Barack Obama's right? And so we have differing views, but I think this pendulum has swung. As a consequence, you know, I believe that the fiscal cliff, you know, the tax hikes that are scheduled in January of next year may not get taken care of before December 31st, but it will get taken care of late January, early February. I believe we won't go off of it. Now, here's one of my worries, and that is I was in Washington, D.C. yesterday, and you should probably ask Bob Stein a little bit about this later, but people like John McCain are starting to get really, really jittery about spending cuts, especially the defense cuts. And they're willing to get rid of this sequestration, to change their minds, to throw it to the side of the road. And if that's the case, then we're really not going to cut spending. So it's kind of fascinating. I mean, we live in a very volatile time. Now, I'm going to close up with this. And that is, even though I just talked about, you know, is the pendulum swinging here, we can have major differences. You can argue with me, Jim argues with me, you know, I argue that. I mean, we have great debates about this, about whether it's going to, which way it's going to go. But what I will tell you is, in a way, We already have it priced in. As